All right, so we are joined today by a legendary South Carolina attorney, veteran Palmetto Politico, and arguably one of the most outspoken figures probably in South Carolina history, Dick Harpootlian. Thank you for joining us, man. I got to ask you, do you like legendary or veteran? Which one of those
You
sits
know,
with you best?
um, I am legendary and I am veteran, so it's hard to pick. Um, but in terms of most outspoken in South Carolina history, we got John C. Calhoun, we got Ben Tillman, Strom Thurmond. Um, I mean,
Recent history.
well, I might agree in recent history, only because all the good ones are dead.
Well, you've rarely minced words, man. So I mean, for me, it's a compliment. I mean,
Well, why would you mince words?
well,
I mean, I don't get it. When I was in the Senate and giving a speech, um, right over us was a painting of John C. Calhoun and then Dumb Spiro Sparrow. And after 6 years over there, I proposed that we change, and I got a Latin translation for a new uh, uh, motto over the Calhoun picture, which would describe the Senate I got to know,
mhm.
which was "Let no dead horse go unbeaten."
Did you actually have the translation?
I had the translation, and I wanted to put that up there in Latin. I couldn't get anybody to co-sponsor, but it really, I mean, that's the problem with government is the bloviating, the inability to do what we do in private business, which is figure out how to get from A to Z without going through the other 24 letters. Matter of fact, they relish going through the other 24 letters. They're hoping they only get to the 16th letter and time runs out. I mean, it's government. I don't think it's always been that way. At least that's not my observation, but it's gotten painfully ineffective um, for all kinds of reasons. But I do not miss the Senate.
I believe it. Well, they're scared of their shadows over there. Most of them.
It's all about can you get reelected,
Mhm.
not can we get something done, because they want to come back, because they come back because they can get something done, but they don't get something done because they want to come back,
Mhm.
and it's a vicious cycle. Now, that's nothing new. If you read Al Gore's father voted for a civil rights bill knowing it would defeat him, and he did it anyway.
Mhm.
That's profile and courage is what we need more of. And there's not many, if any, of those in government these days.
You can count them on one hand. Tom Davis, maybe.
In the Senate, I mean, Tom Davis, uh, um, one of the good guys. I like Wes Clymer. I know
Yeah.
he and I on many, many issues are 150% divergent, but he is spot on with government transparency and honesty. Um, Harvey Peeler and I go back 50 years. We're fraternity brothers, room next door to each other. I think Harvey has a focus on finance that might be different than mine and yours, but he has a consistent philosophy.
But you're saying the dorm rooms at Clemson were a little more fun than the Senate antechambers?
Without going into details, and there is no statute of limitations in South Carolina, yes.
Yes. And Jack Swirly, too. You came up with Jack Swirly, too, back
Jack
in
and
those
I
days.
met at Clemson.
Another legendary attorney here in the Palmetto State.
And the way Jack and I met, we're in a this sort of hippie house one night, and the room was full of smoke, and this big mitt comes out of the smoke and hands me something to smoke, and I looked over and I said, "Hey, I'm Dick Ripley." He said, "I'm Jack Swirling." Jack and I basically met over a toke.
Not inhaling, I'm sure.
Oh, we were inhaling. We were inhaling. It was 1968.
I say that because we're in this conference room in your office, which is decorated with photos of you in the Oval with various presidents, Obama listening intently to you, you and Bill Clinton, who famously did not
Well, I
inhale.
stopped. I stopped the drug use years ago.
Well, I got a ton of political questions for
Okay.
you, but we got so much to cover. I wanted to start though with the book, why we're here, what we want to talk about. And everybody and their brother has written a book about Murdaugh, and there's mini series, there's podcasts, there's Murdaughpalooza, essentially. You didn't go that route. You took a story that was more South Carolina centric, but one that, and again, we're going to talk in detail about this book, but the story of Peewee Gaskins. First question I want to ask you about the book is what gravitated you to that story?
Well, I've been practicing law for 50 something years, okay? And I prosecuted, not necessarily in trials, but handled dozens of murder trials and hundreds of murder cases as a prosecutor in 12 years of being a solicitor and assistant solicitor here. The Gaskins case was unique in a number of different ways. One was, here's a guy who's got convictions for 13 prior murders, and then being the head trustee at the most secure wing of the most secure institution in the state, takes on the job of executing an inmate on death row at the behest of the victim's son, and did it in a very ingenious way. I mean, would have gotten away with it had he not tape recorded his conversations with the guy that arranged for him to do it.
The exploding radio
Well, it wasn't actually a
alarm
radio.
clock.
Well, he said, "Get me a quarter stick of dynamite and a radio." Okay,
Yeah.
but he ended up using a device that he convinced Tyner was an intercom. It was a cup, a prison cup, unbreakable prison cup, and because he was the guy that fixed all the electric issues and plumbing issues, he had a soldering iron in his cell, melted a hole in the bottom of the cup, put a female plug in there, connected that to a blasting cap, had a quarter pound of C4 explosive on top of it, nuts, bolts, screws, any sharp piece of metal, and glued a speaker on top. Had it delivered to Tyner on death row, and he had run a wire from his cell to Tyner's cell, and he's been yelling through these vents at Tyner when Tyner wanted drugs or food or whatever. He befriended Tyner. And when he told Tyner what it was, said, "Hold it up to your ear and see if you can hear me." And he plugs his end into 110, blew Tyner's hand off. There's x-rays of the speaker inside Tyner's brain, so it worked.
Yeah.
And then he pulled the wire back through, cut it up, and laying on his bunk when people run by and when they hear the explosion. He was ingenious, and would have gotten away with it, but for those Al Waters investigator found those tapes, and that was the end of that.
The murder that you wrote about at the beginning of the book was one of the toughest things to read because it started this tale off on just this incredibly dark note, and then there are incredible humorous moments in the book too, but there's this darkness that's pervading the book. Is this guy is that
Well,
who
and
Pee Wee
that's,
was?
the other piece of this is, I mean, think about that guy. He drowns a pregnant woman
Mhm.
because she's one of his former girlfriends, because she's pregnant by a black man, and then takes a hammer to the 2-year-old child and beats it to death. And a 2-year-old child with a hammer. I mean, what kind of monster does that? And then, as I began getting involved in this case and was with Gaskins in court, he was engaging, he was affable, he had a sense of humor. I mean, and during this death penalty case, there's an episode in the book where he and I are sitting in the courtroom over a lunch break. I'm working to get ready for the next witness, and he's sitting 20 feet away from me with 2 guards. And in his high-pitched voice, first of all, I don't think I've ever had any defendant call me by my first name. But he says, "Dick, Dick," and I wasn't offended by it because he'd been calling me Dick we'd been there 4 weeks. And so it wasn't, whenever he saw me, "Hey, Dick, how you doing?" or smile at me or wave, very friendly. I said, "What do you want, Pee Wee?" He said, "You're a lot like me." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You like killing." Okay, he said, "I like killing, you like killing." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You like killing me? You're enjoying this." And I said, "No, no, 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 no. And we went on to explain I was seeking justice. But the fact that he thought we were kindred spirits, that I like killing like he liked killing. Remember the baby? He
Yeah.
liked doing that. He liked it. His racist tendencies dominated Tyner, black.
Mm.
Peewee was the first white man executed for killing an African American in the history of the state. So part of what prompted him to kill Tyner was not just this vengeance for Tony Simo, whose parents were killed by Tyner, but he could kill a black guy too. It was a win-win for him.
Two birds with one stone.
There you
Let
go.
me ask you this. You mentioned that he felt that personal connection with you, that he felt that he saw something of himself in you. Dick, what does that say about you, man?
Well, and that's what the book's about. The book's about, am I? He sent me Christmas cards after he's convicted, sentenced to death. He'd call my house. He'd call, Jack and I were practicing law together, Swirling, his defense lawyer. We went into practice together after that. He'd call the office, talk to Jack and me.
Say what?
Well, hey guys, how y'all doing? I read y'all in practice together now. Did y'all plan that before the trial? Those kinds of things. And of course, my phone, my mother comes out, she's visiting and says, hey, there's a guy on the phone for you. I said, who's that? She said, Gaskins. I said, and so I told Peewee, don't call my house. You're crossing a line here. And of course, the final line he crossed was 2 weeks before his execution. He tried to have his son kidnap my 4-year-old daughter and hold her hostage to get to on some sort of plot to get me, have him brought up to the courthouse and he could escape. So, affable, friendly, had a sense of humor, but stone cold killer.
He would have manipulated a relationship with you just like he manipulated the relationship with Tyner in the prison.
And manipulated a relationship with virtually, he never actually killed somebody looking him in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
It was always a bullet in the back of the head or, held him at gunpoint with their back, shot him in the back.
How many do you think he killed?
My belief is he killed 14 people, 13 previously convicted, and then Tyner. I know in his post execution autobiography he claims 100. I don't believe it. I think he was trying to promote himself as the biggest killer in the history of the state. He probably was the biggest killer in the state, but 14 is not a bad body count. He just wasn't satisfied with it. And there's no look. In 1975, he had been convicted, sentenced to death on 2 murders. The Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, came down with a case called Furman versus Georgia and declared the process of the death penalty was unconstitutional and mandated a bifurcated trial with a guilt phase and then a penalty phase. And in that interim, Kenny Summerford, who was the solicitor over in Florence, convinced Peewee that he could now redo those trials and go for the death penalty again. And that was an open question, but anybody that was a serious student of law would have said, no way. Peewee got convinced he could. So Summerford said, you tell me every murder you've committed, and I will not I will guarantee you life. Okay, but if you don't tell us and we find out about one later on, we're going for the death penalty. And he had 2 more actually pending at the time he hadn't been convicted of. So Peewee gives him a 500-page. I have a copy of it, of the transcript, 500, which we introduced in the 1983 Tyner trial, detailing each and every murder. So at that point, Peewee had everything to gain and nothing to lose by telling him about every murder he'd ever committed, and it was 13 of them.
So he's inflating it not only to self-aggrandize, but to have a practical effect of perhaps sparing his life.
Well, if he had told about the other 100 he claims, yes, but that's why I think that's total bullshit. And by the way, believe it or not, Peewee would lie from time to time.
Let me ask you this, though. You referenced just a moment ago the debate over the death penalty. And in the book, you address that. And it was interesting to read it because it felt like you were a bit conflicted. You state on the record you oppose capital punishment, and yet in the Peewee Gaskins case, what was the
Well,
language?
I think, look, and in the book I talk about this. I came through college, went into college as a young Republican, ROTC, going to be a fighter pilot in Vietnam. But in '68, I saw some things, read some things, talked to people, and my view on the war, civil rights. I mean, I was at Martin Luther King's funeral, marched from Ebenezer to Morehouse with 500,000 other people. I saw things that changed my view of the world. And my view of the world at the time was the death penalty was racially discriminatory. My view was that killing wasn't justified. And yet, in 1975, when I got through law school, and by the way, my hair was long and I'm smoking dope and very liberal, supported McGovern in '72. I mean, but when Jim Anders, who I helped beat, a 20-year incumbent solicitor here, offered me a job, and I said, man, I don't want to be a pig. What are you talking about? And he convinced me that if I was going to change the system, do it from the inside, not bitch from the outside. I went to work for him. And what I saw, and it's very detailed in the book, is horrendous things, horrendous acts committed by um, people against other people, killing, torture. My first death penalty case was in 1975, and I don't think I appreciated I mean, in 1975 in South Carolina, the punishment for murder was death. Every murder,
Mhm.
unless the jury recommended mercy. I mean, I never prosecuted.
The good old days.
Yeah, the good old days, right? And so this guy's sentenced to death. We pick a jury Monday morning at 10. He's sentenced to death at 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. I mean, it sort of happened so quickly. I didn't really appreciate it. And of course, later on, our Supreme Court reversed that sentence and gave him life. But as I saw more and more horrendous things, um, my view on the death penalty changed, but still felt. And of course, my boss was making the call, and I participated in those cases, but it wasn't my call.
Mhm.
It was his, and we did a bunch of death penalty cases, none of which got the death penalty.
But one of your proteges, someone who looks up to you, I think, as his mentor, idol, maybe even David Pascoe,
You
solicitor.
think I'm his idol?
I'm just saying the way he speaks of you, very
Well,
reverently and respectfully.
I mean, I think, there are a number of young lawyers I hired when I was solicitor in 1991. Pascoe, solicitor in Orangeburg; Scarlett Wilson, solicitor in Charleston; Duffy Stone, solicitor in Beaufort; Greg Hembry, who was a solicitor in Horry and now a state senator; Barney Guzet, who was a solicitor here; um, Kelly Jackson, who was a solicitor over in Sumter. Um, all these kids, they were kids back then, learned, in my opinion, your job as solicitor is to see that justice is done. It's not only the cases you prosecute and get convictions on, it's the ones that you dismissed, that you wouldn't go forward with because an overzealous cop or a victim said things or did things that did not support that the premise that you could prove beyond a reasonable doubt this person committed the crime. One of the things I heard early on in my career, it's better than that 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man get convicted. If you use that framework,
Do you believe that, though?
I do.
Okay.
If you use that framework, you go to bed every night and sleep soundly. If you had a case in which you believe the evidence is not sufficient, say, well, we'll just go to the jury, throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. Innocent people get convicted. And I think it's more important that what you do is ethically and morally right as a prosecutor. I mean, look, as a defense attorney, I think the same thing. I mean, how many clients could I sit down with and help them get a better story, right? I mean, or if you're a prosecutor, how many times can you hide that piece of evidence that would be very beneficial to the defendant? I mean, so you got to play by the rule. The rule of law requires that the people involved are ethical, moral, and abide by the rules. I believe that in my heart of hearts.
But Solicitor Pasco, and again, I think a lot of folks, he's got enemies, but I think most people would agree he's an ethical prosecutor. He's
Absolutely.
been very tough on crime, but he spoke out just this year, switched parties,
Yep.
left the Democrat Party, joined the Republican Party, and he said the reason was the decision by former President Joe Biden, who, by the way, one of your close friends. I mean, he's
Correct.
a friend of yours. You guys are buds.
Friends, been friends, 30 years.
But he said that President Biden's decision to commute the sentences of 37 of the 40 federal death row inmates was the reason that he left the party. He said, I cannot be a part of a party that prioritizes victims or victimizers over their victims.
Right.
Um, when you hear something like that,
Well, I mean, I think, I agree with David. I think that the president took action that I would disagree with. I mean, I think each one of those death penalty defendants' cases should have been scrutinized. You know, if it was some guy that walked into a convenience store to rob it, panics or gets shot at and shoots back or whatever, that's one thing. Peewee Gaskins is something else. And the guy down in Ori that he commuted, I would respectfully disagree with the president. That guy's sentence should not have been commuted. He should still face. Look, I believe that the death penalty is appropriate when the person poses a threat to society. Not because he got angry with his wife and her mother and shot both of them and qualifies technically for the death penalty. But somebody and that's probably the only murders he'll ever commit, as opposed to somebody, Gaskins. Gaskins serving a life sentence, eligible for parole in 10 years, and takes it upon himself to blow up a guy on death row. I mean,
it's not
textbook.
remorse.
That's textbook. I mean, he's still killing in prison. So, I mean, I don't disagree with what David said. I do disagree with President Biden, who I know as Joe. I mean, he's my
Yeah.
friend. But he makes mistakes just like everybody else, and that's one of them.
When you're representing his son, Hunter Biden,
Hunter
right
Biden.
now, who quite a colorful history. How's that case going? What do we?
Well, we got a trial last week of July in Los Angeles. I spoke to Hunter this morning. We're preparing for trial. And again, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not a defense attorney. I'm a lawyer. The duties and standards, whether you're on a civil case as a plaintiff's lawyer or a defense lawyer, are different. Play by the rules. You'll sleep soundly every night and never regret a single thing you've ever done.
We're going to dive into the political questions again in a moment. But before we get there, you referenced just a minute ago bending the rules, hiding the ball on the part of cops, on the part sometimes of prosecutors, judges doling out these lightning fast sentences. Let me ask you this. You've been in this justice system for a long time here in South
Half a
Carolina.
century.
Is it better now? Have things changed? Is it still the same?
I mean, it's better now. Well, it's better now because there's more transparency. There's more transparency, not necessarily because of a redesign of the system, more transparency because of people like you, because of the internet, because of things can be scrutinized remotely. You don't have to go down to the courthouse, go through the boxes of stuff to get the files. It's better in some ways. I'm disappointed. When I started, there were 16 old white guys as the circuit judges in the state, one per circuit. Now they're 40-something and much more diverse. That's better. But I get the sense, because of the selection process, that they're more worried about, in some instances, the rating they'll get from anonymous submissions. I'm totally opposed to that, and tried, when we did judicial reform, to just say, look, you don't like a judge? Say it, and say why this was the case.
Right.
And they messed it up because they did this, that, or the other. But don't have these anonymous criticisms that you can't respond to. That's number one. Number two, when I started, I can remember Judge Louis Rosen from Orangeburg, and Louis didn't tolerate incompetence. If you're trying a case in front of him, you better know the rules, you better know the law, and you better try it in an effective way. Prosecutor or defense attorney. And Louis would, at the drop of a hat, if you asked a question, defense or prosecution, and he thought it was not particularly relevant or smart, he'd interrupt you in front of the jury and say, stupid. And I'd say, Your Honor, that is a stupid question. Don't answer it again. Don't ask it again. Which made me a better lawyer because I'm just up there freewheeling, and all of a sudden I get slapped in front of the jury. The jury's smirking. They're laughing, okay? Which is not a good thing. So I tried a case one time in front of a guy named John Grimble, World War II hero, the guy that took Remagen Bridge and held it, that cut the war short. He would have added 6 months if the Germans had been able to destroy it. Just a courageous guy. And I tried a case. It was a tough case. It was a rape case. And we got a conviction. And the guy named Dennis Bolt was prosecuting it with me. And we sort of high-fived each other when the verdict came in. He gets sentenced. Elderly bailiff comes and gets me and asks me, says, the judge wants to see you. And Grimble talked in a very quick tone. So I walked back to his chambers. He had a big table like this he's working at. And he worked with pencils. He wrote everything out in pencil. And he was sitting there working, and I went to sit down. He said, do not sit down. I said, sir. He said, your conduct in that courtroom was reprehensible. This is not some sort of athletic event, and your celebration, your celebratory conduct is an affront to this court. You ever do that again, I will put your ass in jail. Get out.
Wow.
Okay, now.
For a high five.
For a high five. Because he believed the courtroom was sacrosanct. He didn't put up with any sort of the kind of stuff you see today. And it taught me a lesson that, and all these judges, these old, mean, white guy judges, most of them taught me lessons about not crossing the line. And so I know where the line is, and I may dance on it now, but that experience, I'm out in LA working on this Biden case, and the lawyers out there, there are no lines. So I'm sort of a throwback, but that experience taught me that those judges, and by the way, many of them had racial issues, which were there was a judge, a guy named Tom Broadwater was a black, one of the early African American trial lawyers in Richland County, and it was a judge from another county, I'm not going to say who it was, who clearly did not like having a African American lawyer. They were very rare in front of him, and Broadwater quoted something, a case in which he used the word certiorari, which is, except he didn't pronounce it correctly. And the judge immediately jumped on that. He said, Mr. Broadwater, that's not the way you pronounce that word. It's pronounced so-and-so. And Broadwater, without missing a beat, and said, Your Honor, I got to apologize, but I'm a product of your separate but equal school system. Boom. The courtroom got deathly silent. I'm 26 years old seeing this. I'm going, what's going to happen now? And the judge, like somebody had slapped him, got up, left the bench because he was getting ready to do something horrible. But you see moments of courage like that in the light of what was clearly racial animus. We don't see that today. I thought we'd grown out of that, but I wonder some days. But that era, going through that process, made me what I am today.
And I know when you left the Senate, you were pretty much done with it. But I also remember one of your first hearings at the Senate, we had spoken afterward, and you remarked to me, and reminded me when you were talking about the judge calling you out, you had conducted an examination of someone who had appeared before the committee. And you had told me afterward, because you eviscerated this, I can't remember who it was, but
Pitts.
their entrails were on the
It was a
on the podium.
guy named, wasn't it Pitt? Wasn't that his name?
Yeah,
The guy wanted to be head of some state agency.
but you told me after, I was waiting for a judge to pull me off of this guy, and there was nobody to pull me off of
Well,
him.
that's the amazing thing about the Senate. When you get somebody in front of you like that, and you start asking questions. I'm always, where's the objection? Who's going to stop me? And nobody stops you. The
Mhm.
problem is most of the hearings held in the Senate, I guess maybe except this Loftus thing recently, it's the Marquess of Queensberry rules, and it's almost like some 17th or 18th century British debate. My learned friend, my
Esteemed,
esteemed friend.
honorable.
We really appreciate you being here today. I don't appreciate you being here today. And if you go back and look at every hearing I had, I never thanked anybody for being there. They're there because they want something.
Yeah.
And most of them are there dissembling on what the truth is. We're not tough enough on people who come before a committee and either lie or don't tell the whole truth. And it ought to be going testifying in front of a Senate committee ought to be something you should be apprehensive about, but they're not.
You also mentioned something earlier, speaking about Senator Clymer. Obviously, he's still in the Senate, potentially looking at some other offices. But while you may not be in the chamber anymore, it's been interesting to watch this past session. A lot of the things that you were focused on, particularly transparency and spending, are now starting to really be embraced by the leadership. Senate Finance Chairman Harvey Peeler, you referenced him. He is now making a move against some of this secretive spending. You and Senator Clymer were really the two that started that.
Well, and it's just common sense. I mean, it's not the Senate's money, it's not the government's money, it's our money. And to the extent that it is being wasted, and what we found with many of these earmarks, when you looked at them, we're going to nonprofits that didn't exist. We're going to be spent on stuff that didn't benefit anybody, but maybe that
Which
Senate.
party over there is the one that's doling out these earmarks again?
Well,
Sorry.
it would be the fiscally conservative party,
I was about to
the
say,
Republican Party, and that's
lifelong Democrat here
well.
saying this.
Look, I'm a fiscal conservative. Always been fiscal conservative. Tough on crime, and we might differ on social issues. I'm pro-choice. My wife is pro-life. I think that's a personal decision. I don't like government sticking their nose in any of our personal business. And I remind my Republican friends, the same Constitution that guarantees you the right to say what you want, to do what you want, the same Constitution that guarantees you the right to carry a weapon, a gun. I hear that all the time. It's my constitutional right. And it imbues you with responsibilities. It's not just the rights, but you have a responsibility. And that's hard for people to accept.
You were also the lawmaker who blew the lid on the crony capitalism that goes on over there, these handouts to wealthy billionaires, David Tepper, the Carolina Panthers. That
Horrible, horrible,
You
horrible.
called that one, and it blew up in their faces.
Well, and again, I think it changed. We began looking at callbacks. The legislature wasn't interested in. We give the money. Did we get our money's worth? And Harry Lightsey has been a breath of fresh air. He is, and while I was there, gave me a report on callbacks every month. So they understand better now, and I'm thankful that I could play a part in bringing that to light. But 6 years, man.
You don't miss it.
I'm not a.
I've told everybody I've talked to, you seem more relieved and relaxed to be done with this.
Well, and I get to do what I enjoy doing, practicing law. I mean, I've got some great cases, and I'm not bad at it. The problem with the Senate is you spend at least 80% of your time listening to other fools bloviate. And
Do you have a favorite bloviator from your time in the Senate?
there are a few.
You don't want to name names?
I'm not going to name names. but some from my party, some from the other party. But it's, again, it's not efficient. I understand the Senate is not supposed to be primarily efficient, but when bills never get a committee hearing, when nobody has the opportunity to talk about the issue, that's not right. At least, I mean, if you got the votes to pass the bill, that's fine. But you ought to allow a process. And the process, we never have the process, or very rarely have the process.
You mentioned your party. It is currently mired at historically low approval ratings. It has embraced an agenda that many believe runs counter to some basic values, some pretty hard to argue points like the number of genders, things of that nature. We mentioned earlier one of your proteges, David Pascoe, has left the Democratic Party for its
Right.
position on ostensibly embracing violent criminals over their victims. Let me ask you a very blunt question. Does your party have a future?
No, that's a very blunt answer. Unless, well, look, my party has become a club, okay, that wants to sit around and talk about pronouns, wants to sit around and talk about issues that most people either find offensive. Transgenders, okay, now that's less than 0.5% of our population, and and certainly they should not be persecuted for the gender choice they've made, if it's a choice. I'm not. Look, nature, nurture, I don't know. But is that really, when we've got an educational system that's deficient, when environmental issues are concerning, when health issues, I mean, we got all these issues that apply to everybody. Why aren't we focused on those rather than making sure somebody can call themselves a he, she, or I mean, it's nuts. They have mismanaged their financial affairs. They went and bought a building and the lot next door. And when they came to me for money last year, I said, sell the lot. I mean, it's not being run like a business. And Jamie Harrison, who came as chairman of the party after me, left it in financial disarray, went and became national DNC chairman, did the same great job there that he'd done for the state party. I don't think much of what happened to our party or the DNC was helpful in electing candidates and defining what our issues are. I'll tell you an old story, and this ain't a new problem. In 1998 or 2000, Terry McAuliffe ran for chairman of the DNC. I supported him. And we went to a conference. I want to say it was just outside of Phoenix, which I thought was a little weird because a very nice resort, most of these people wages were being paid by the party. And I didn't know, I mean, again, I'm a fiscal conservative. I didn't know why you needed, I mean, if I wanted to go on my dime and stay at the Ritz-Carlton, that's fine. But I don't understand why state parties are paying for that. But that,
You guys were the party of fiscal conservative that Bill Clinton was cutting positions, balancing budgets.
Right. But we're staying at some foo-foo place outside of Phoenix. And the first day we divided into the caucuses: the Hispanic American caucus, the Asian American caucus, the gay caucus. This is back before we had LBGT. There was a lesbian caucus. There was a Pacific American caucus. All the caucuses, and I'm standing in the library, and Terry walks in the lobby, and Terry walks up to me and said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, they've all divided up the caucus. I was waiting for the white guy caucus, but there wasn't one." He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I think I'm going to caucus with the lesbian caucus. At least we got something in common." I mean, and that's the problem. We as a party decided, that everybody should be identified by gender, race, or African American caucus, the black caucus. Once you start dividing us up that way, there's no unity. It's all about, oh, it's my issue. Not that African Americans or lesbians or gay people don't have their issues, but why would we divide our party up that way? And by the way, when you go to the national convention, this began in the 70s. If you want to be a delegate, There's going to be so many men. There's going to be so many women, so many gay people, so many transgenders, so many this, so many that. Um, I mean, it looks like the couch at Animal House. I mean, it's just you're not going to build a party when you say you can't be Mr. White Guy, okay? You can't be a participant in this party um, because we're going to make sure that 50% are not going to look like you or more than that. I don't get it. So um, I think the party has got to change, or there won't be a Democratic Party. Now, maybe there will in New York and California and maybe Ohio, Massachusetts, Vermont. But in the South, we're done.
Yeah,
We're done.
haven't won a top of the ticket race here since '98. Haven't won a statewide
Okay, and by the way,
race.
I was chairman in '98.
Yeah, you got two of them. And then '06, I believe, is the last statewide victory, and that was by, I think, 400 votes, the closest
Yeah.
in
Well, you
history.
can't look. Cultural issues. We're so on the wrong side of the cultural issues. Um, and by the way, I think to give you a bit of history, in '86 I ran for Richland County Council at large, and none of the African American candidates got elected. I led the ticket. Only white people got elected, and so the Justice Department came in and divided us up into single member districts, and then African Americans like Bernie Scott got elected, John Scott. Um, folks, their political careers began there. Bob Coble was on county council with us. Um, and it was described to us at the time as a remedial measure, remedial, because what would happen is once African Americans were involved in the process, they could garner support from white people. And so, because no white would vote for a black in Richland County, when I say no, not enough, 1%, to elect African Americans, because they were only 40% or 38% of the population. You needed 1 in 5 white people to vote for an African American to get them elected if all the African Americans voted. So it racially polarized us. We were polarized, and over the last 40 years, because it was remedial, it like putting a cast on a leg that's broken. If you leave it on there for 40 years, the leg atrophies.
Well, look at the redistricting at the legislative level.
I fought
Clyburn
it there. I fought it. I fought it. I
and
fought it.
and Clyburn's seat has actually his insistence on drawing even more of the black vote in his district. It cost you guys the first district.
Correct.
It's made the fifth district
Well, and who are allies
non-competitive.
on that? African Americans and Republicans.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the most unhealthy. We've resegregated our state. And as a result, there are a bunch of white people that don't have to talk to black people and a bunch of black folks. I mean, I talked to senators about, look, 45, if you go to 50, from 55 to 45% African American, that means you got to get 1 in 7 white votes if African Americans vote for you. Wouldn't do it. So, and the Justice Department, I've litigated in the '90s, litigated that issue and got spanked. Although we won some marginal stuff. But, the Justice Department, the Republican Party, and the Black Caucus all together on this. And as a result, I think we've damaged our society. Why do we have a Black Caucus? Why do you need a Black Caucus? I mean, their economic interests, social interests are the same as the rest of us. By continuing this segregation by race, we're manifesting and promoting segregation by race. This shouldn't be. I mean, they're African Americans. Sure, they're interested in historically black colleges or different issues affecting impoverished Americans than perhaps the guy that, or man or woman that represents Manhattan or Soho or whatever. I mean, they're different. They're different issues, but certainly it would be a lot easier if that 65% white district had a little bit of black in it. That would be a swing vote in a general election. It might temper that Republican, or might, and of course on the flip side, we have African American representatives that are not concerned with the issues that generally everybody else is interested in. So I'm very much in favor of, and the Supreme Court took a step when they did away with preclearance.
Mhm.
And I think, and they've done away with racial preferences in colleges. I mean, I think we're on the cusp of maybe the Supreme Court declaring the single member district, unless you create a district in an effort to deny an African American, a minority, a chance. You take a naturally uh, situated African American district and then carve it up to dilute that person's ability to get elected. Jim Clyburn could get elected with a 40% African American district.
At this point, absolutely. Absolutely.
So if all the African Americans vote together. Now, we're beginning to see, African Americans voting for Republicans.
Higher numbers
We
than
got an
ever.
African American Republican senator. So that's healthy.
Mhm.
I'd love to see African Americans participating in Republican primaries. That's healthy.
Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned being glad to be back in the law, having some great cases. Let's talk about one of those cases that's gotten a little bit of attention nationally, internationally. This redheaded guy down in the Low Country, a former assistant solicitor, member of one of the most powerful families in the state, a legal political dynasty down there in the 14th Circuit in the Low Country, Alec Murdaugh. You were his lead attorney in his
Yes.
double homicide trial and his various financial trials before state prosecutors and judges, before federal prosecutors and judges. Let me ask you this. At any point, did you ever expect this story to turn into what it has become, which is just, we've mentioned it earlier, Murdaughpalooza, the movies, the podcasts, did you,
No, I did not. I mean,
how did that happen?
well, let me say this. We're sitting in a room. You're sitting in a chair that Paul Murdaugh sat in with Maggie and Alec right there,
Wow.
as Jim and I sat here and got them ready for the boat trial. So, I mean, there was some controversy over that case, but did I ever think that would explode into the murder case? Did I ever expect Alec to be accused of killing Maggie and Paul when they walked out of here holding hands?
And you don't think he did it?
I don't think he did it.
Let me ask you this. Who do you think did?
I have a theory. If there wasn't a chance the case might be retried, I'd let you know. But but I have a theory, and there's some evidence to support that theory, which we could not use in the first trial. It's complicated. Um,
Well, I do have to put you on the spot here, though, because the forensic debate during the trial, the theories that were put forward by your expert, theories that were put forward by the state's expert, when you look at the crime scene photos, when you look at the autopsy photos, which were not publicly released, the only people that saw them were the jury. When you look at that evidence, which I believe, at the very least, the press should have been granted official access to,
right.
it does lend credence to the prosecution's theory of how they were killed. And it did, in my mind, looking at some of that evidence, take away from the theory that but
Well,
you're saying you've got a theory that,
okay. Let me say what the state and the defense and the prosecution agreed on was, and their expert agreed with us, is whoever shot Paul would have been covered in blood and brains. They were so close. We said it was a contact wound. They disagreed with that, but they both agreed that Paul's head basically exploded. His brain hit the ceiling, ended up at his feet, and blood and brains went everywhere. Whoever shot him would have been embedded with brains and blood. There's no evidence or witness that puts Alec's clothes. I mean, one of the experts testified he would have taken a significant amount of time in a shower to get all the blood and brains out of the hair and whatever. They never found. They checked that night. They checked the shower. No blood and brains. There's nowhere they found any evidence that he had showered off
what
brains.
about the hose at the dog kennels that such a big deal was made about it being not where it was supposed to be? Isn't the theory implied by the prosecution he hosed off at the kennels?
Any blood? Any brains? No. Who was there that night? I mean, what SLED says is, yeah, there were no blood and brains, but we're incompetent. We didn't gather evidence that night. We took no fingerprints in the feed room.
Mhm.
We took no DNA in the feed room. We didn't check for blood over by the hose. But don't give the defendant the benefit of the doubt about any of that. We're just incompetent. There were tire tracks that we drove over. There's all kinds of opportunities to gather evidence which they didn't do.
Mm.
So that's one piece. The other piece is the uncontradicted evidence is Maggie's phone was thrown out on the side of the road at exactly the same time. Alec cranked up his car a mile away or three-quarters of a mile away. How do you do that? I mean,
He didn't throw the phone.
couldn't have thrown the phone. He's
And
cranking up his car.
and the evidence related to that, which was introduced, is a big part of your appeal. And I want to
Yep.
ask you about the appeal, but pulling back a little bit from that grisly crime scene, I want to go back to something that you said very early on in this process. You referred to this case as an Ozark situation, a reference to the show about the money laundering, this very sophisticated drug cartel money laundering operation. You used that term Ozark situation applying to this case. What did you mean by that, and what can you tell us
Well, I
about
think we can look at a couple things. One is that the financial records indicate that literally millions of dollars went to Eddie Smith.
who
Um,
was Alec Murdaugh's drug
just
runner, check casher?
cousin, right? Whatever. Um, and there was a pattern of Eddie getting drugs for him, allegedly OxyContin or Codone. And Alec had no question, huge drug habit. He went to rehab while he was out on bond. Doctors indicate he had all the symptoms of somebody coming off of a massive drug addiction. What never was explored by the state, and by the way, Eddie Smith's still walking free. The evidence would indicate he participated in the sale of and distribution of millions of dollars of illegal drugs. I think that there's an explanation of what happened that involves drugs.
When in one of your pretrial motions, you and attorney Jim Griffin, who you referenced earlier, pointed the finger at Eddie Smith as being potentially involved in the homicides.
Well, if we get a new trial, you'll hear all about it.
Well, let's talk about that process, because a little over a year ago, in the Richland County Courthouse, just down the street from where we're filming this, there was an evidentiary hearing about allegations of jury tampering involving the clerk of court down there in Colleton County, the former clerk of court. She's resigned in disgrace, most would agree, who allegedly tampered with the jury in this trial. At that hearing, one juror went on the record and stated that not only was there tampering, but it influenced her decision.
Correct.
4 others affirmed that there was tampering.
Correct.
Let me ask you this. Why the hell was that not game, set, match? And why was a new trial not ordered that day?
Well, you'd have to ask Justice Toll, but that's part of the appeal. We believe that there's a federal case directly on point. There's no state case that supports Judge Toll's position. We believe, and we've put in our brief, that she misinterpreted a decision from Judge Kittredge. It didn't say what she said it said. But the South Carolina Supreme Court will have an opportunity. We hope by the end of this year to hear argument on that and correct what we believe was a mistake.
What do you think your chances are there? There's so much discussion about, oh, it's 50-50. Oh, it's what do
I
you
mean, if you look at the federal case, what are our chances at the state level? I mean, that's not the only issue in the appeal. We talked about the cell phone being thrown out and the expert they qualified, who we believe should not have been qualified. If that evidence were not contradicted, but if their expert was knocked out, that's enough to give us a new trial.
It blows their whole timeline out of the water.
Correct. And there are a number of other issues like that. The 2.5 weeks of financial crimes before we ever got to the murder, the forensics and all of that. So I think, I can't give you, we should get a new trial.
from the Supreme Court.
from the Supreme Court, we believe. They may have a different view of the law than I do or that the federal courts do. If they deny that, then we'll be going to federal court on a habeas to give the federal court a chance to apply the federal standard.
Were odds for Alec Murdaugh at the state level or the federal level, which would you say?
I believe this Supreme Court is going to give us a new trial.
Really?
I think this is one of the best Supreme Courts we've had in my 50 years of practicing law.
Now, there are those who say that the Supreme Court wants this to go away. They believe this has been a stain on the legal profession, that a lot of your allies in the trial lawyer lobby want to kind of get back to business, that this has been an inhibitor. I mean, after all, Alec Murdaugh is not just the scion of this powerful family that I mentioned. He was the leader of the South Carolina trial lawyer lobby for a very long time. So this is a guy who literally led the organization that is representing the trial lawyer lobby. Very powerful.
That's about money. This is about justice. And again, based on the forensic evidence, I don't believe Alec Murdaugh killed Paul and Maggie. And again, I had an opportunity to watch them for a year, watch the chemistry, watch the interaction. There was never indication. And by the way, the government, the state's theory, their motive is that he thought he was going to be discovered because of some transaction at 2:00 in the afternoon and decides to distract by executing Maggie and Paul. I mean, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. But the jury, you didn't have to sell the jury on that, because after 2.5 weeks of him stealing money from, widows and orphans and mentally deficient and quadriplegics, you never got to that. Is the forensic evidence sufficient or not? So, I mean, it was a good strategy by the government, but I think an illegal one.
Let me ask you about, we've talked about the jury tampering, which when we write about it now, I don't even view it as alleged anymore. I mean, it has been confirmed on a court record. There was tampering. But let me ask you about something a little more sinister that has been alleged by one of the former jurors. A lot of folks don't remember, but hours before the verdict, a juror was removed from this panel.
Right.
For allegedly speaking out of turn against the judge's instructions about the case. This juror has written a book in which she claims that she was the target of a conspiracy because she would not go along with Becky Hill's attempts to sway them. She basically says, I was targeted because I was a holdout. I wouldn't say where I came down on the case. You followed the Myra Crosby story.
I mean, I was in those conferences with the judge, with Myra, during the trial.
Do you believe this jury was not only tampered with, do you believe it was rigged?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say anything publicly about the former clerk, but certainly there are questions that need to be answered, and they should be answered by a thorough investigation. I'm not sure that Alan Wilson's shop, Alan, who called Becky Boo at the press conference after the conviction, who has a relationship with her, ought to be supervising that investigation. I know SLED agents had not even talked to these jurors until last week, almost 2 years after the offense, a year after Judge Toll's order. So I'm not sure that the Attorney General's office is sincere in their claim that they're going to investigate this matter. I think that is a problem. I think that this, again, I believe that prosecutors should approach I know there's political pressure involved, but they should put that to the side and do their job in an ethical, honest, and open way. And I don't believe that's going on right now.
Should SLED be investigating?
No, absolutely not. No. This idea, this part of SLED is investigating it, and this part of SLED, they weren't involved in the trial. No. I mean, they ought to ask their sheriff's departments, whether it's Richland County or Spartanburg County or not Spartanburg, but
Yeah.
Greenville County, or I mean, there are other big sheriff's departments that have investigators. This isn't a complicated crime.
Yeah, Greenville County could easily do it.
Easily do it.
Leon Lott
Leon Lott could
could
easily do it, and step away from having the same people who have a stake in this trial being affirmed. Get them away from this investigation.
In fact, Leon Lott would be perfect. He's actually had some acrimony with SLED in the past. I mean, it would to me instill some confidence if he were to come in and say, "Hey, they did it right."
And he's got professional, long-term investigators. Some are still there that were there when I was solicitor.
Well, you know Mark Hill. You've worked with
Yep.
Mark Hill. He seems like a guy that has integrity. How does this pass the smell test for a guy like Mark Hill?
Well, I think Mark Keel is an administrator, and he's administering, what, 2,000 employees? Um, one of the things that came up during the trial speaks volumes about SWED, which was up until November of 2000 and when did we do the trial? 2022, right?
23.
What? 23.
2023. Yeah.
Okay. So in November 22, they were still claiming that there was blood spatter on Alex's shirt, and it was Paul's blood. Holly Miller, that works for me, was in preparation for the trial that was coming up in January, was going through every document again, and she found the report that SWED had for like a year and a half, which said that was not human blood. And we brought that to the attention of the Attorney General like I say, right after Thanksgiving, prior to the trial in January. And it was a explosion. So how did and of course the SWED agent, David Owens, admitted on the stand that he hadn't read the email with the report a year and a half earlier. And they were building this case based on that blood spatter.
Well, that was what convicted him in the court of public opinion.
Correct.
Leading up to the trial.
Correct. I think he published a number of stories about it.
I don't think that was my tip, though. I think that might have been one of my former employees.
Former
tips.
employees, right, whose credibility is somewhat questionable. But the fact of the matter is that how do you, I mean, if that's your key piece of evidence, why hadn't that been scrubbed by the agency? That agency on one hand is saying, oh, that's Paul Murdaugh's blood. Their forensic chemists are saying that ain't even human blood.
Well, not only that, if I recall correctly, there was an attempt to bury this in some files that were not easily retrievable. Is that?
I will give them the benefit of the doubt and say that was just more incompetence, that there was not a active effort to obscure. Although, again, those were not in the file that when they gave it to us. If Holly Miller had not gone through and looked at every document, thousands of pages, we never would have caught it. They'd be putting evidence up that was Paul Murdaugh's blood.
Would you agree, given the extent to which the Murdaughs were fast and loose at times with justice in the 14th Circuit, to the extent that they at times, perhaps in Buster's era, old Buster, perhaps used some of the methods you referenced earlier, hiding the ball,
Right.
Things of that nature. Given that that was what built that empire, how important was it for the prosecutors, for the investigators, for the judge in this case to get this right? Because it literally is, it's not just Alec Murdaugh on trial, it's the system. And now we're in a situation where we can't even trust the integrity of this verdict. And there's like a full-scale verdict protection racket going on instead of what you mentioned, a search for actual justice.
Well, here's the consolation. I believe this Supreme Court is not in the business of protecting verdicts. I believe John Kittredge is the most honorable, perhaps the most honorable and honest, and we've had other very honorable and honest Chief Justices, but he is, in these times, currently, the man for the job. And the other justices are, I think, every one of them If you look at all their other decisions, when they struck down the initially the abortion bill, I mean that's just saying hell with politics or the funding for private schools. The politically easy thing to do would have been affirm both of those, but they didn't do that. And I believe this Supreme Court, especially, not that others have been overly politicized, but I have full faith that they will do the right thing.
You believe they can withstand that political pressure
Well,
from?
I think they've got an easy way out. I think the easy way out is the jury tampering, because it's not the judicial system. It's a person in a county, an elected official, who admitted, based on the testimony, that she was in the business of selling books, and a guilty verdict would be better to sell books. That's the testimony of two other clerks of court that were working with her.
Well, this isn't exactly a compliment, but I can tell you your book is better. Not exactly a compliment,
About
but
to say, what about better than the egg ladies?
hey, that one was pretty good. Dick, thank you for all this time. You've been incredibly generous. As you think back on that half century of your life that you've devoted, whether it's to the party politics, whether it's to justice, you look back on that life. Let me ask you this question. What stands out to you as the biggest difference that you feel you've made?
Well, I think that in each stage of my life, whether it was as an assistant solicitor and then the solicitor or in county council or chairman of the party or the Senate, um, each one of those offered an opportunity to push what I think is my personal agenda, which is that government should be transparent and responsible. Um, when I'm in the Senate and I'm talking to a senator about helping on something, he said, "Well, that'll get me beat." My response is, "Why do you want to be here if you can't do what you think is the right thing?" And today, and in my opinion, the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, have abrogated their role, and they're not willing to step out and say what they think is right, whether it's about the Ukraine or whether it's about not. My wife corrects me, being an ambassador. It's not the Ukraine. Whether it's about Ukraine or about immigrants and due process. By the way, I think if you're here illegally, you ought to go home. But I think there ought to be a process to determine if you're here illegally, and what's the criteria for sending you home. My grandparents came to this country and went through Ellis Island. They did it legally. If you're born here, I believe in birthright citizenship, as has every judge that's ever looked at it. I think you ought to be able to stay here, and if that means you stay and your parents go, then you got to make that choice. But I think people are entitled to due process. I think that this Congress is, and in terms of how you reshape government, I think Congress does that. These executive orders, Biden got carried away with his. Trump's taken it to a new level. And so in my 50 years of practicing law and being in office, writing a book, I like to think that I brought some level of honesty, transparency, and humor.
I was about to say, you definitely brought some entertainment.
Because I think as a trial lawyer, I try to entertain a jury. I don't think that you can win cases with, a big blackboard with, how you block and how you tackle. You've got to entertain them. And by the way, they expect it more today because of television, and the CSI has made a prosecutor's job much more difficult because they expect DNA. I mean, when I started, there was no DNA. There were no fingerprint. If you had a fingerprint, you had to find a suspect. There was no AFIS system to compare. Cameras. I mean, it's made everybody's job. There's always a camera lurking somewhere to get a picture of somebody leaving or coming or whatever. So it's changed dramatically, but it's still the same old, let's put on a show. Let's entertain this jury and educate them at the same time. Same thing with politics. You know, constituent constituents are important. They elect you, but they're not always right. And so you've got to have the guts to say, interesting point, the facts are different. You're wrong. Joe Biden won the election. Okay, say it. I mean, after the election, there wasn't a Republican that would say that. Does it take guts to say the facts? And those folks who, you know, won't concede, that COVID was not some artificial. There was actually COVID. Vaccines were effective. I mean, it was just the fact that we can disagree about the implication of the facts, but we can't disagree about the facts. You're entitled to your opinion, but not your own version of the facts. And that's what I see today is a new phenomenon. That wasn't really 30 years ago. There were accepted facts. I would say that. Were we winning in Vietnam? We were told we were, but we weren't. We know now that they lied about it.
We were told there were weapons of mass
Destruction.
destruction.
So I mean,
it's as
they're
old
big.
as the
They're big lies.
crucifixion.
They're
Yeah.
big lies. So anyway, yeah, I've had fun. I think the bottom line is whatever I've done, I've had fun with, and not that they weren't serious issues. The Murdaugh case. I mean, whoever anticipated millions of people would watch that on television? Whoever anticipated? We didn't. We didn't even, because we weren't watching television and weren't looking at social media. We were getting ready for trial every day. It was probably the second week of trial when we showed up and people were in sleeping bags outside the courthouse to get in. We're going. I asked one, "Where are you from?" "Oklahoma." "Were you just in the area?" "No, we drove here. We wanted to be in the courtroom." Okay? Nuts.
When it's said and done, will you write a Murdaugh book?
I think Jim and I have talked about it. It would be Jim and I. We've kept video and notes, video evidence and notes of our preparation, like the staircase, which we would use if it came to that. But we can't do anything until the case is over.
We're a ways away from that.
And we're years away from that. But having written this book, I understand now the process, which ain't easy, and I understand that we'll find out whether people want what I'm selling and the way that we're trying to tell the story. I mean, as I said, I sat in this room with Paul and Maggie and Alec and Jim. Jim went fishing with Paul. I mean, we had a relationship with those guys. Alex's father, Randolph, and I were solicitors together. He down there, me up here. So I had a relationship with him. I never knew Alec, but I knew Randolph, and I knew his father, Buster, pretty well back in the day. But we all, it was a different time. It was a different vibe, if you will. And they were from, that part of the state, which was, we didn't quite understand. And by the way, plaintiffs' lawyers didn't go into that circuit. If you didn't associate the Murdaughs or this firm or that firm, remember that's where Bob McNair, our governor, Saul Blott were from. And they ran the legal business down there with Buster for many, many, many years. It was closed shop. Not like Richland County or Greenville County or Charleston County. Different. And I think it's changed now. And by the way, what's happened in that case has changed dramatically how we practice law. I'll give you an example. One of the problems with one of the cases down there was that the judge approved a settlement, never filed an order.
So it's Carmen Mullen, correct?
I'm not going to call names, but
fair enough.
Okay, but I just did a death settlement on a case last week. We've got to file a proposed order, a petition, spelling out how much money, who gets what, attorney's fees, costs, all of that. Got to file that. The judge has to review the petition with the client
It's created
in
another
court.
layer of accountability.
Pardon me?
It's created a
Huge level of accountability. It used to be we just get the judge to go sign the order. I'm talking about 10, 15 years ago, just like what happened down there. That's no more.
Mm.
The client's going to look at a judge. The judge is going to say, they settled the case for $500,000. You're going to get $300,000. They're deducting these costs, and the check will be made out to you. And Mr. Defense Attorney, is your insurance company going to, structure it? Or I mean, we won't hear any more about forge from anybody. But I mean, it's so that's been a very positive development. Nobody's going to be cheating the client out of the money. Now, once it gets in my escrow account, sure, I can steal it. But the client just heard they were going to get $300,000 in 30 days.
makes it a little harder for lawyers to.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't think lawyers will be stealing money. But no, it's look. I love what I do. I get up every morning excited about going to work. My wife thinks too excited about going to work at this stage of the game. But it's I said this 50 years ago, and somebody asked me, why are you still prosecuting cases after 8 years? When my friends had gone on to more lucrative, I was making 40 grand a year. I said, because every day I get to go up here in front of 12 people and entertain them and plead with them, and they can't get up and leave. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So
Well, I know you've got a ton of lawyering left to do, but I hope you write more books, because I'm telling you, this was, for those of you, we're going to put it up here, Dig Me a Grave. It is gripping, man. And the way that you got inside his mindset, and the way that you kind of traced through all of the experiences that shaped this killer Peewee Gaskins. I mean, it's riveting stuff,
well,
man.
thank you. And let me say this to you. I had a guy named Sean Assell work with me on this book, New York Times bestseller author. Writing is not what I do for a living. I've been involved in writing in my distant past when I had an underground newspaper here called Osceola, way back. And so I know how to write. But that's not what I do for a living. And so having Sean involved allowed me to develop a book that not only was factually accurate, but told in such a way that it's easy to read. And that I write legal briefs. They're not supposed to be easy to read. But telling the story in an easily digestible, entertaining way, Sean Assell was extraordinarily helpful, and much credit should go to him.
I hope he helps you tell more of these stories, because I think you got a few more to tell. Just judging from this conversation. Dick, you have always been incredibly generous with your time with us, gracious even when we've been critical of you. Thank you for taking the time today. Dig Me a Grave. You can get it right here. Just scan that QR code right here, right now. Dick, thank you.
Thank you.